What's up, everybody? Good afternoon. We're coming in a little bit late, but we are coming in nevertheless with College Football Prospect Watch Wednesday. And we've got more players to look at from the most recent week in college football. Some really good stuff on offense this week. Defense was a little bit of a disappointment for me, but nevertheless, let's sort through what we have and find the standout players at various positions in college football. So let's just jump right in here with a quarterback. We're going to try to go a little quicker than usual this week. We're going to start with Jordan Travis of Florida State, a guy who's been growing on me a little bit. Jordan Travis was a little bit of a tough sell for me. I don't know, there's just something about him that I wasn't quite able to embrace, kind of like J.J. McCarthy. I know they're great college quarterbacks, but is it going to work in the pros? I'm not so convinced, but Travis is starting to kind of win me over here with some of these recent performances, and so is McCarthy for whatever it's worth, but Travis more so. 22 of 35 in this game, 359 yards, so he was hitting some big plays. Three touchdowns. He ran for almost 30 yards and another touchdown. Seven of his passes went for 23 or more yards. A lot of big plays. 76.4 PFF grade. Really solid, really effective. And he seems like he's getting better as the year goes on. Also, got to give it up to Bo Nix because he went and had a really nice game against a great Utah defense. 24 of 31, 248 yards, two touchdowns, four rushes, 8 yards, and a touchdown on the ground. 76.9 PFF grade, rock solid, continues to really be a guy who hasn't had a bad game yet. I still have reservations about Bo Nix, but you cannot deny how well he's playing. Also, going to give a shout out to Penix, Michael Penix Jr. of UW. He didn't have his best game of the year, but I watched that game. His receivers absolutely hung him out to dry with some of those drops. He would have had probably 450 yards if his receivers could catch. And we know he was playing very sick. So the fact that he overcame all that and still threw for 370 yards, four touchdowns, and had 10 passes of 14 or more yards, and had a 77.7 PFF grade, yeah, sign me up for that. He had the one pick that bounced off his receiver's hands and was a really weird play. Like I can't even really count that against Penix. He's a tough sell for me too as a pro prospect, but gotta admit he's grinding. He's doing all the right things. One guy who I haven't really discussed very much this year, Devin Leary. He shows up in this segment. I believe his first time this year because he played a great game, even though Kentucky lost to Tennessee. 28 of 39, 372 yards, two touchdowns. Also had 21 rushing yards. 12 of his passes were completed for 14 or more yards, so a lot of chunk plays. And it's too bad for him that Kentucky couldn't get the win. By the way, I want to say Joe Milton, he was the opposing quarterback in this game. He was very efficient, but he wasn't as good as Leary. I just straight up 83.6 PFF grade. Really good game for Leary. And final quarterback we're going to take a look at here is Cam Ward of the Cougars. I just kind of feel bad for him because we've learned that Cougars team just isn't very good. And they are on a big time cold streak, but Cam Ward continues to grind it out. 35 of 50, 315 yards and a touchdown. Ran for two touchdowns and 35 yards, 69.6 PFF grade. So he's doing what he can. It's just not a lot to work with right now if you're a QB for the Cougars, unfortunately. All right, so those are your quarterbacks. Tight ends. Tight ends were a little bit tough this week, but we did find some new names on this list. Not new is Jaheim Bell. He's been turning it on a little bit lately, along with Travis. Four catches for 51 yards. He did allow a sack in blocking, but Florida State ran the ball fairly effectively, 126 rushing yards. His PFF grade was just under 70, so he's starting to turn it on a little bit here and become one of the best tight ends in this draft. It's not anything over the top great, but it's pretty good. Bryson Nesbitt of the Tar Heels, three catches for almost 90 yards and a touchdown. UNC ran the ball all over. I think they played Georgia Tech this week, 267 rushing yards. They still lost, but very big offensive game for UNC. And Nesbitt's PFF grade was just shy of 81, so really effective. Mitchell Evans of Notre Dame, he's a new name to this list, but he's starting to get some draft attention. And he is somebody who had a good game this most recent week. Five catches, 66 yards. Notre Dame had over 150 rushing yards efficiently, 68.5 PFF grade. Jalen Conyers of Arizona State, he had a big game receiving and blocking. Four catches, 90 yards. Arizona State ran the ball like crazy on a really good Oregon State team. 235 yards, 6 yards a carry, 92.7 PFF grade. So he's starting to come on strong at the end of the season here. He may end up being a draftable guy. And final guy is another new guy. It's Dallin Holker of Colorado State. Was hard to find another guy to talk about here, but 5 catches, 43 yards, 65 PFF grade. That'll have to do. Yeah, it's good enough to make the list this week. Let's put it that way. Okay. Interior offensive lineman. It's the usual suspects with one new name, and that new name is there more than anything because it's time to start discussing this guy because I've been unaware of this guy's existence until pretty recently. But let's go through the list. Christian Mahogany's first for Boston College. They always run the ball down their opponent's throat. 250 yards, 4.6 yards a carry. Um, didn't Christian Mahogany didn't allow any hurries or hits on the quarterback, but they did allow 2 sacks as a team, 58.5 PFF grade. I know the grade itself is not that great, but I think he played a solid game looking at it. So Christian Mahogany continues to be one of my top left guards. Zach Frazier, one of the top centers of West Virginia. 286 rushing yards, 5.7 yards a carry. No pressures allowed individually. WVU quarterbacks got sacked once in this game. 64.5 PFF grade. Good, solid, workable. Tate Ratledge of UGA. UGA ran the ball pretty effectively, 171 yards. No sacks allowed on the quarterbacks that Georgia played, and no pressures allowed by Ratledge individually, 65.9 PFF. Here's the new name, Talizi Fuaga. He's starting to get some day 2 hype. He's kind of come out of nowhere here, but he's here now. And if Oregon State has one player that you really want to pay attention to going forward, it's probably this guy. Oregon State ran the ball pretty effectively, even though they lost 131 rushing yards, 4.5 yards a carry. Fuaga actually didn't play a great game compared to his usual. He allowed 2 hurries on OSU quarterbacks, but his PFF grade was 74.6. So on the whole, he played a really good game. And on the whole, he's a very good player. This was actually one of his lesser games this year, and it was still really good. And finally, we're going to go Cooper Bebe. He usually makes this list anyway. 180 rushing yards for KSU. I think they won 41-0. He did allow a sack on Howard, but overall he played well. 70 PFF grade almost. Rock solid on the interior offensive line. Oh, well, he's playing tackle mostly this year, but you guys know what I mean. You guys know what I mean. All right, so that's the offense. Let's jump on over to the defense here. Some really good performances on defensive lines this week, I'm happy to report. Rook Orohoro is finally showing up to the party. He had 3 tackles in this game, all of them for a loss, including a sack, 2 pressures. Clemson only allowed 64 rushing yards, 2.5 yards a carry, 202 yards allowed as a team. They still lost because their offense is just that bad. 73.1 PFF grade. Can't really fault Rook for the loss, though. He did what he could, and he played a really impressive game for me. Devondre Sweat gets back on our good graces after a couple weeks off this list for Texas. 7 tackles, 1.5 for loss, a QB pressure. Texas only allowed 95 rushing yards for 3.7 yards a carry. 292 total yards allowed, so really good defensive performance. 6 points, 84.1 PFF grade. He's starting to push into Mozzie Smith territory. I really like what Devondre Sweat's doing this year. Next guy will be Princely Umanmillion of Florida. I probably mispronounced that last name, forgive me. But he played a really nice game for the Gators. 9 tackles, including 1.5 for loss. This was against Georgia, too, by the way. 2 pressures and a 73.5 PFF grade. He's starting to bump up into that day 2 territory for sure for me. Tyleik Williams is next up of Ohio State. He's been here a lot, and he's here again after a good game for the Buckeyes. 4 tackles, 2 for loss, a sack, 3 QB pressures, a pass deflection at the line of scrimmage. They only allowed 94 rushing yards, 3.8 yards a carry, 259 total yards, and 10 points by that Ohio State defense. So Tyleik Williams continues to be my second favorite nose tackle in this draft. Really effective at stuffing the run. And final defensive line guy I want to shout out here is Brandon Dorlus of Oregon. He had 2 tackles, including 1 for a loss, 3 pressures, 1 pass breakup at the line, 99 rushing yards allowed, less than 3 yards a carry against Utah, 241 total yards, 6 points, 67.8 PFF grade. So Brandon Dorlus, it's not huge numbers, but he was part of a very impressive defensive effort, and he's creeping up as well. He's starting to really make a name for himself. So defensive line this week was solid. Had a little bit of a harder time at these last two positions. Linebacker, I found three guys who have made this list a decent amount already this year, and then one brand new guy, and I couldn't find a fifth guy. So let's go in order here. We got Jalen Ford of Texas. He had a big game for UT. 11 tackles, one for a loss, three pressures, allowed 35 yards in coverage, 95, and we already went over the Texas defensive stats when we talked about Sweat, but Texas's defense played great. Only a 60.3 PFF grade for Ford, but I thought he played well, making impact plays. Barrett Carter of Clemson. Both Clemson linebackers made the list this week. I think they both played really well despite losing that game. Five tackles, including one for a loss for Barrett Carter, a sack, two pressures, three coverage yards allowed, 72.4 PFF grade. And Jeremiah Trotter, six tackles, four pressures. So this man can blitz, which we already knew, but man, he can blitz. 11 yards in coverage allowed, and an 80.7 PFF grade. So he's doing his job now. He's coming on a little bit stronger after starting the season underwhelming to me. Peyton Wilson of North Carolina State was the new name here. He's starting to get some day three push, and he had a nice game this week for North Carolina State. 8 tackles, 1.5 for loss, a QB pressure. That should be pressure, not pressures. And an interception that he returned 15 yards for a touchdown. 14 allowed yards in coverage, 84 PFF grade, great all around game, did a little bit of everything. And he's going to be one of those sleeper linebackers that we probably spend a decent amount of time discussing in February, March, and April. All right, final position is safety. This was another week where another position rather where I had a little bit of a hard time. I found four guys, couldn't find a fifth guy, but let's figure it out. These guys are pretty familiar to you if you've watched these videos all year. You got Bu Braid of Maryland, 8 tackles, one for a loss, didn't allow a single reception or coverage yard, 66.6 PFF grade, really rock solid game from Bu Braid, still one of my top safeties. Cameron Kinchins, of course, already a first round pick. He had a really interesting game for the Hurricanes. He had 9 tackles, including half a tackle for loss, pass deflection, and a pick six, 29 yards touchdown, but he allowed 108 yards in coverage. So you take the good with the bad, I guess. If he scores a touchdown on defense but allows 100 yards in coverage, I guess you take the good with the bad. 65.1 PFF grade. James Williams of the Hurricanes as well makes this list with 13 tackles and allowing only 6 yards in coverage. So solid on both ends. 72.3 PFF grade, rock solid. Final guy I found was Javon Bullard of Georgia, 7 tackles, 27 yards allowed in coverage, 69.1 PFF grade. Not super remarkable, but solid, effective, did his job. And that's what I got for this week. So let me know what you think. Probably missed a couple guys out there. Had a heck of a time finding linebackers and safeties this week, admittedly. But overall, pretty good, pretty impressive. We're seeing some guys really solidify themselves. We're seeing some sleeper tight ends emerge, which is a big deal to me. Really need some of these guys to come on strong for draft season. And yeah, that's what I got. So let me know what you think down below. See you guys later. Go Hawks.